welcome back. Today we are going to start with a new poem, A Death of a Naturalist from Rhapsody, a collection of ISC poems. Now, the poet of The Death of a Naturalist, Seamus Heaney, had an illustrious career. He was a professor at Harvard University. He was also a professor of poetry at Oxford. In 1995, he received the prestigious Nobel Prize in Literature. So let us explore the poem of this man who has given so much to literature. Now, Death of a Naturalist is his first collection of poems. It was published in 1966. He received 3 literary awards for his first collection of poems. So let us read this and find out what the poet is trying to present through this poem. Let's get started. Now, in this context, it is important to mention that how Seamus Heaney looked at poems and what did he think of the poetic process. A quote from one of his lectures in Harvard, where he calls poetry as a dig for finds that end up being plants. So it is a process of exploration that ultimately sprouts into something new, that ultimately sprouts into a new poem, a new revelation. It is also important to note that Seamus Heaney grew up in Derry, that is a farmland in Ireland. So his poems are mostly about the rural life in Ireland. This poem is also no exception. So let us start reading. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. So he begins not with a picturesque description of nature, but he starts with a flax dam. Now, what is a flax dam? It is a small artificial pond which is used by Irish farmers to rot the outer stalks of flax plant. So it is not a very pleasant view. Festered means decaying in the heart of the townland. So this was one of the main attractions of the city. That is how he presents it. Green and heavy-headed. Heavy-headed is an alliteration, please note. Flax had rotted there. So he is deliberately painting a grotesque imagery where we can almost imagine the rotting, heavy-headed flax plant, weighed down by huge sods, and flax husks are weighed down by heavy blocks of turf and soil. It is completely immersed in it. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. And how did they manage to rot these plants? They managed to rot it by keeping it in intense humid heat under the punishing sun. Punishing sun is a personification that the sun rays were intense and the entire pond was under that intense humid heat, so that it facilitates the rotting of the plant. Bubbles gargled delicately. Gargled delicately is an oxymoron. So there is the sound, that gargling, but it is soft. That is what he's trying to indicate. And blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. So it was a zone which was smelling oddly, which made someone nauseous. There were blue bottles. There was such a thick covering of flies that it almost resembled nets. So along with this unpleasant smell, there was a strong net of flies over the surface. But best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. But the best part was slobber. It's a thick saliva that's dripping. And this imagery has been deliberately painted. So it is narrated in the same way as a child would look at this kind of a space and looks at it and describes it in very simple terms, like saliva of frog spawn that grew like clotted water, and it appeared like water that has been clogged, that has turned into solids in the shade of the bank. So there were, towards the bank, there were frog spawns that were coming up and they were in bubbles. Here every spring I would fill jam potfuls of the jellied specks to range one on window sills at home. So every spring, so this was an annual activity for the child. So every spring he would go down in this mud, he would use his jam pots and he would bring jam pot full of what? Of these frog spawns. Almost like a naturalist who tries to collect these samples for further exploration. Jellied specks. Now this is a direct description of the frog spawn. How does the frog spawn look? It is like a small egg. Every small round is like a tiny spot, and it is surrounded by a clear jelly-like substance which he is comparing with saliva in order to protect the egg. So he looks at it and he carries it home, and he also delivers it and presents it to his teacher, Miss Walls. He puts it up on shelves at school and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst. So he eagerly waits and watches these small specks of saliva, and he sees that he waits for those bubbles to burst so that nimble is agile, quick moving tadpoles to come out of it. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Now this is innocent joy, and this is an innocent interest in the cycle of the weather. Here it is very important to understand that this particular paragraph signifies the genuine interest of the child as a naturalist. His innocence is explored here. Here the nature is controlled, made safe for the child to explore. So it symbolizes innocence. What happens in the next stanza of the poem? We will find that out in the next video. Meanwhile, if you like my work, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel for more such interesting explanations, explorations and our deep dive into literature. Thank you for watching. I'll meet you all again in the next video.